Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from Denver, Colorado, USA, Mr. Kon Apostolopoulos. I hope I have your pronunciation right, Kon, and apologies if I mispronounced it.
You did very well, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Kon is the founder and CEO of Fresh Biz Solutions, a human capital management consulting group. He is the founding partner of the Global Institute for Thought Leadership, a Thinkers 360 Global Top 50 Thought Leader, and an author. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled 7 Key Ways to Navigating a Crisis. So, Kon, before we get into Fresh Biz Solutions, I want to ask you to talk to me in brief about your own journey.
Well, my journey is a journey of change, of adaptability, of flexibility, if you will. And part of the reason why I'm so fascinated and in love with change overall, my dear friend. I consider myself a citizen of the world since I have lived and worked in 4 different continents.
Wow.
And I am, in many ways, what you would call the American success story from the perspective of I'm a first-generation immigrant in this country.
Okay.
But I was born to first-generation immigrants somewhere else. And I have learned through my life that you can make home where your heart is, where you choose to be, and that in many ways, when we can seek out what is best for our family, for ourselves, when we pursue our dreams and our journeys like my parents did, that we can find success, that we can find happiness.
So well said. Thank you. So let's start talking a little bit about Fresh Biz Solutions. I like the name very much, but tell me about this venture and what was your motivation to start it?
Fresh Biz Solutions, as the name implies, is a labor of love in many ways. It's an opportunity for me to bring my knowledge from various areas of human resources, from the talent management, organizational development, leadership development avenues, areas where I'm able to help people, to improve processes, to help develop organizations. And because I have that breadth of experience working with different industries, I realized that no matter what the industry, people are people. And many of the challenges that we face as leaders are very similar. So bringing good ideas from one industry, one sector, into another one, by repackaging them, bringing in a fresh perspective, looking at the problem perhaps even with fresh eyes as somebody coming in from the outside, allows us to provide those fresh business solutions to age-old problems.
Very interesting. So, when I was reading about you, it was fascinating to read that, you work with your clients as a training and performance improvement partner. Help me understand what you do, and please give me some examples.
Sure. Let me finish up. You asked me one thing that I think is important, because I suspect that many of the people that are joining you on the show here sought out and pursued the ventures that they had. With me, it was a little bit different. I consider myself more of an accidental entrepreneur.
Okay.
I found myself through a lot of the different crises that have happened over the last 10, 20 years to have kind of marked my path, my career path. And I've gone from working in very large organizations, very much like yourself, companies that have a footprint of 100,000 employees spread over 100 countries, to be able to learn my craft, if you will, and then be able to eventually get to that point where I'm helping other organizations and reapplying those same skills. Well, in this case here, I found myself after the crisis of 2008 with the financial crisis here in the US, after a few years after that, the company that I was working for was purchased and the headquarters moved, and I found myself looking for my next career opportunity. But interestingly enough, I don't know if it's because of my gray hair or what
Hmm.
it was,
Yeah.
it was a little bit harder to find a job per se. But surprisingly, people were willing to pay for my expertise in the
Mm,
consulting realm. And
mm.
that's how the venture started from there.
Wow.
But when we talk about how we apply these things, it's almost like all of the experiences that I had in my world, whether it's my background and my family, my social environment. I grew up growing up in Greece, being used to being in situations where we can piece different things together, what people now call the gig economy.
Mm,
But also being in a situation where I am a collaborator by nature, a
mm,
catalyst, if you will, somebody who's used to going in, helping solve problems, and then being able to step away and allowing the solution to flourish.
mm,
I pride myself in being able to be an embedded partner with my clients.
mm,
I join their teams, I join their senior teams, their boards, their C-suite, and I sit at the table as a partner, listening and
mhm,
observing, earning their trust and being able to guide them and provide solutions for them.
mm,
So some of those solutions, some of those interventions are training, but many of them are not.
mm,
Many of them have to do with other pieces, whether
mhm,
it's helping them redesign their systems, working with them on how do we deploy and communicate
mm,
what the intent is of the organization, the vision, or the intent of senior leadership. So in many ways, my goal is to move the needle, to help them improve their performance.
mm,
And many times that happens through training, but many times not.
Very interesting. You also talk about transformation, and
Mm.
transformation is a word that seems to mean different things to different people.
Mhm.
I'd love to get your perspective on how you define transformation.
Well, interestingly enough, I see it as first and foremost with a positive undertone. To
Right.
me, transformation, the kind of change that I want to affect on a person, on a
Mm,
process, on an organization, is always intended to be for the positive, to
mhm,
improve things.
mm,
And the intent is to bring about significant change, meaningful change,
mm,
perhaps not always in size and scope,
mm,
but definitely in the effect that it has on the organization and its
mm.
people, and being able to move things into a better place, to make changes that will leave the organization, the people, much better than it was before.
Right. But when I look back at my own 25, 26 years in the large corporate world, um, most people or most leaders prefer status quo or maybe status quo ante. What do you do to persuade leaders to make a transformation?
That's an interesting question because I think that it's not just leaders in general that are change averse, if you will. I
Mm,
think in general, human beings are change averse. I
mm,
think our brains are not wired to seek out change constantly.
mm,
I think it is only under necessity that we find ourselves changing. And
mm,
it is similar with the corporate leaders that I coach, that I work with, that I consult with.
mm,
It is usually the case for change that either they have discovered themselves and they
mm,
bring it to me and to help them make the change,
mm,
or with many of my partners, we sit down and we explore these things. It's through the questioning that we uncover that need for change,
mm,
because so many of them are dissatisfied with the current state of affairs,
mm,
but they are reluctant to make those changes.
mm. Interesting. And do explain with an anecdote the work you have done
Mhm.
recently in leading transformation.
Mm. Okay, so let me take you on a journey that's been a few years in the making, but
Mhm.
culminated last year.
Hmm.
One of my key partners, one of my major clients that I work with, probably don't tell anybody, but probably one of my favorite groups to work
Uh-huh.
with.
Okay.
I've been working with them for a number of years, and our engagement started through the training realm by bringing
Hmm.
me in to help train and develop a lot of their leaders.
Hmm.
But what I found is essentially where the umbrella under which I perform my business right now.
Mhm.
To kind of digress just slightly, if I
Yeah.
may,
Yeah.
as you know, many organizations, if not all, have very well-crafted business plans. They spend a lot of time, their senior leadership gathers, perhaps they pay consultants like you and me to come in and help them define what those business plans, their strategies are. But those strategies aren't worth the paper that they're written on if they
Mm.
don't have the people to execute them.
Correct.
So in my case right now, I help these organizations, helping my partner, in this case with the story that we have, to really develop a pipeline of leaders ready to execute their strategy. So over the years, what I've been able to do is intervene with workshops for a lot of their emerging and senior people, with their C-suite, with their president and the people in their senior team, being able to conduct executive coaching to really help them grow and develop in their roles, and then create a communication plan and systems that will allow them to support their vision of where they're going. So essentially, we were able to identify what talent do we have internally, what are our needs going forward, and how do we get there to develop those people? Specifically, because you and I are business people in many ways, let's talk some specifics. With this particular company, it's a major construction group, and it is one of 4 major regions in the United States, very similarly sized. Well, this region at the time when I started working with them was at about 250 million in gross revenues for the year. Their goal, their wild goal at the time, was within the few years to reach 400 million, to almost double in their revenues. Well, that implied that there were a lot of things that had to happen structurally with their people, with their processes to be able to get to that point. So we started working on those things. And over the years, through the interventions that I was describing to you, last year, this same group achieved 600 million in revenues.
Wow.
During a period of COVID, mind you, coming out of the pandemic. Not only that, though, from that, they basically had 6 times the profit of all the other regions combined because of the way that they were leading. They had leaders at all levels of the organization. Beyond that, all of their human resources numbers, all of their key metrics, retention, employee satisfaction, promotability scores within the company, all off the charts. While many companies were experiencing this great resignation and people fleeing from them, they were a destination for many in the industry that were seeking a good place to work, because we offered that to them.
Wow. Thank you for sharing this amazing story. Wonderful. My next question to you, Kon, is on culture. You live in a country which is incredibly culturally diverse. And, you must be working with people from across different continents, different countries. You have lived and worked in 4 continents, as you told me. And yet there are cultures which find it difficult to transform, and there are others who transform very easily. My question to you is, how does culture impact transformation?
Culture can be a driver of change. It can be an enabler of change, but it can also be a deterrent to change. As you mentioned, some cultures are more easily embracing of change, and some are not. You and I come from our cultures, our families are from cultures that are thousands of years old.
Correct.
And in many ways, one of the key differences I found coming to the States more than 26 years ago was the fact that in my culture, as in yours, we measure time in generations.
Absolutely.
Here in the United States, I found we measure time in minutes and seconds.
Yes.
And things are very moving at a much different pace here. The expectation is that things move at a much different pace. Similarly, there are industries and there are organizations and cultures within organizations that embrace that speed of change much quicker than others. And whether it's extremely fast or at a certain pace, change we must all. And that's the part that we need to understand, that we need to adapt, that things are not the same. Even from the last few years, we are not living in the same world. So culture must learn to adapt and embrace the changes that are necessary for its survival.
Very well said. Thank you. And, on a lighter note, since you talked about minutes and hours, I remember when I first visited the US in 1989, I came back and I said, in that country, even distance is measured in minutes. Because when you tell me how far you are, they say 15 minutes. So
that's exactly it. That is exactly it.
But now, moving on, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on coaching as well. But my next question is on technology. So, Kon, one of the things that I have often wondered is that when I talk to senior leaders, senior corporate leaders, they often complain that technology seems to be moving faster than they can cope with it. And it seems to be transforming the organization faster than they are able to handle it. It's almost as if they're sitting on a technology horse that they're not being able to control. I'd love to get your perspective.
Well, it's a very interesting question, and I will answer it very similarly to the way that I answered your question about culture. Well, in many ways, I see technology as something that can drive change, as many of these leaders describe. It can facilitate and enable our ability to change quickly and adapt to new situations, new markets, new environments. But it can also be a detriment. When we allow the technology to dictate our business decisions, a lot of times that can become a problem. We choose our leaders, we allow our leaders to make those business decisions, and technology should be a facilitator, a supporter of that process. And we need to be able to find the answers to our challenges using a tool like technology.
Right.
But beyond that, it should not be dictating the way that we go, because so many of the decisions that we have to make involve other factors, like people, like markets, like our customers, like our employees. But at the end of the day, the changes that we are seeing are nothing more than the tip of the iceberg. As we enter this fourth industrial revolution, these are the changes that are really impacting our lives and our businesses. In so many ways, you mentioned that I'm involved with training heavily. That's a big part of what I do for leaders. My message to them is that going forward into this future, we must be able to learn new skills, unlearn, and then relearn. And these are the things that will dictate how we approach things, because what we held sacred and solid yesterday may not be the case tomorrow.
Correct. Well said. Well said. So I'm going to now ask you a couple of questions on coaching, because you're obviously an outstanding coach as you lead organizations through transformation. Given your amazing background, as a corporate leader and now as someone who's an entrepreneur doing your own thing, how has your background supported your coaching philosophy, some of your styles, and your own values?
Fascinating question. Let me try to unpack that a little bit and hit some key points. To me, I think part of it is who I am has allowed me to be somebody very receptive and open and empathetic to people's situations and challenges. I recognize, because I have interacted with so many different people and so many different cultures in my history, my background, that there are different perspectives. And I can approach my coaching relationships in a very non-judgmental way. The fact that I have a trainer's hat on at times allows me to mix and match. There are times when it's totally appropriate for me to just listen and ask the right questions of many of these leaders, especially the senior leaders that I work with. Because a good coach, unlike training, coaching is all about really helping the person discover what's already inside them.
Correct.
With training, a lot of times we insert new knowledge, new information that people can work with. But being able to switch between the two is wonderful. But to your question, that helps me smile a little bit. Part of the reason why many call me Coach Kon is not necessarily because I coach executives, but rather because I coach young children. I coach student athletes. I coach soccer at many different levels, from recreational all the way up to very competitive and to Olympic development programs here in my state. And I've been doing that for many years. What I found, to be honest with you, Ashutosh, is that the lessons that I learned from coaching the kids have helped me coach senior leaders. I'll give you an example, if I may, for 1 second.
Yes.
I was struggling with a very strong personality of an executive leader that I was working with. He was frustrated because he had communicated to his senior team about a direction that he wanted to go in, and he was extremely frustrated that they did not follow his orders and his direction. So I asked him in our conversation about exploring this and understanding where his frustration was coming from and what his part was in this process, where he may have not done his part. And I explained to him, when I work with the young kids, even at the youngest ages, I ask them, what makes a good pass to your teammate? And inevitably, the children come back to me and say, Coach, I think a good pass is when I can get the ball to my teammate and he or she can do something with the ball.
Yeah.
So I brought that example to him and I said, what you did is essentially pick up the ball and kick it as hard as you could down the field. You didn't look to see, is there anybody there to receive it?
Well
Did
said.
they know what to do with it? And all of a sudden that light bulb came on.
Amazing. What an amazing example. Thank you. So I'm now going to move to your book, 7 Key Ways to Navigating a Crisis. But before I ask you the book, I want to know, is this available on Amazon?
It is indeed.
Okay.
Amazon and many of the major retailers carry it.
Correct. So I'm going to ask all my viewers and listeners to go and check out Kon's book. I will go and check it out myself. And now my question, tell me about your book and your hypothesis to write it.
Interesting. So let me bring you back to the beginning, early days of 2020. At this time, a dear friend of mine and good partner in many ventures together, Dr. Ilya Grigoris and I were co-authoring a number of articles for major online periodicals and different websites. In our process, we had enjoyed that writing together. We had our businesses were at a point where we were having some of the best years. And I had already had a number of different bookings for training, for speaking engagements, for different things to help companies and clients. Well, mid-March, when the crisis hit, everything shut down all of a sudden. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we are, okay, how do we move forward from this? So much of what we do depends on us being able to be out there, to travel, to visit our clients. And now we can't. So he and I basically put our heads together after a few days of feeling very distraught from this. And he picked up the phone and called me one morning and he says, we need to write about this. We need to be able to help people. Are you in? And without hesitating, I said, absolutely. Now, the interesting thing is that he and I come from different angles on the subject. He has a PhD in psychology. So he has understood the human nature of things. He also has helped in many catastrophes as a first aid for mental health. I have approached things from my perspective from a corporate transformational standpoint and working with people en masse in teams and organizations. So understanding the impact of change and how, when it's thrust upon people, how they might respond. So we put our heads together and no joke, within 45 days, Ashutosh, we had a book that we published ourselves online. Why? Because we felt that speed to market was so important. People were getting information about the statistics of the illness, of the pandemic, about physiologically what was happening, about the death tolls, all of this stuff, but nobody was concerned about the emotional state of people, the emotional well-being. So what we did is we put out a very practical guide with 7 keys to unlock people's resilience so they can understand how can they emotionally deal with this, mentally, spiritually, even help them be able to deal and cope in very simple and practical ways. So we spent the first year being able to promote the message and helping people.
And would you be able to share some of the key ways to navigating the crisis?
Absolutely. Because the same thing that applies to the individual at the time of the pandemic, there is no shortage of crises. Even at the time, we had financial crises, we had mental health crises that are impacting all of our worlds. We have socioeconomic changes that are happening throughout the world. Well, the 7 keys can unlock that for the person, but also for the organization. The first key is self-care. When we find ourselves in a moment of change thrust upon us like this, we need to first and foremost take care of ourselves. Just like you do on an airplane when the flight attendant says, put your mask on first before you try to help others. So self-care is first. Awareness of how we are responding to the changes, our surroundings. What changes are impacting us? What are major? What should we be bringing our attention to? So many times when we ask about changes, we're told about changes, we think the entire world is changing. But sometimes it's not the case. Many things stay the same. Being able to distinguish the two is important. Flexibility is the third key, adaptability. You and I have had firsthand experience, even during our call, about what we need to do to adapt and flex.
Correct.
Preparation. Preparation is the fourth key. You notice that, I mean, every year, India, when they go through monsoon season or different times where the climate is there and we have major changes, if we're not prepared, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
We need to know. We know something will happen, so be prepared. What's our risk management strategy? And then initiative, because the best way for us to start reclaiming control of our world is to take action.
Right.
And then key 6 is positive attitude, that belief, not sunshine and rainbows, but the pure belief, the confidence, the resilience that we will be able to overcome, the grit that we need. And then ultimately, key 7 is kindness, my friend. We start with kindness to ourselves through self-care. We end with kindness towards others, because that way we can support each other during times of change.
Wonderful. Fabulous 7 points. And I think I'm now going to buy your book and go into a little more detail in these 7 keys. And my last question to you now, Kon, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your learnings through your amazing journey, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
Let me provide 3 that are top of mind for me right now, based on our conversation.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about the book and the 7 keys to navigating a crisis, but crises will always be happening around us, whether they are due to global changes or a very personal one. Maybe it's the loss of a job, or death in the family, something. There is always change. But understand that crises can also create opportunities for us, especially in the business world. Crises have generated so much change in the landscape. When we think about Uber or companies like Airbnb, they didn't exist before the crisis of 2008. Very similarly today, you and I are operating with technology. How many of us would have loved to have Zoom stock before this crisis? So opportunities abound personally and professionally in the midst of crises. The second one is include yourself in the kindness and service that you provide to others. Make sure that you don't forget that you deserve a seat at the table as well when you are serving kindness to others. And the third one I'd love to leave with people is probably the one that resonates and is probably at the heart of my journey. And that is remain adaptable and flexible, and understand that change is constant. In the ancient Greece, my ancestors used to say, tapandari, change is constant, and we can never step into the same river twice, my friend.
Absolutely right. And you know, the story of the river, that's said in Hindu scriptures as well, that, you know, the river is never the same. You know, it's
and neither are we.
Absolutely right. But on that note, Kon, and your 3 amazing lessons, crisis will always happen. Look for opportunities in these crises. Include yourself in the kindness that you are imparting to others. Be kind to yourself. And the third one is remain adaptable and flexible. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. Thank you for talking to me about Fresh Biz Solutions, about transformation, about some of your thoughts on coaching, and finally about your thoughts on your book, 7 Key Ways to Navigating a Crisis. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.